Hello, Huddlers. Given how hard it has become for marketing leaders to drive pipeline growth, that is, one might wonder if the old model is broken. And if it is broken, how the heck do we fix it? The answer may well come from one of the creators of the old model, Jon Miller, who was the co-founder of Marketo and Engagio, which Demandbase gobbled up. And many of you will recognize him because Jon was a longtime Huddler with us when he was CMO of Demandbase. So I think Jon can take as much credit for anyone in building the modern tech stack. And now he's eager to help marketers rip out what's broken and replace it with a new go-to-market playbook. So with that, please welcome Jon Miller. Hello, Jon. How are you? And where are you this fine day?
I'm great. I'm working from home today in Burlingame, California.
And just before we get into any of that, you are planning another startup, right?
Yeah, I am. It's very early. Still kind of in stealthy stage, but just did, close my seed funding on Friday. So that was a fun little celebration.
There we go. All right. Well, I certainly would not be one to bet against you. I'm really excited about this conversation because I know you've invested a lot in looking at this. Now, one of the things that having listened to read Smart Brevity, had the I like to get something really valuable into the conversation right away. So let's talk about three things marketers could do right now to fix their broken playbooks.
Sure. Well, I'll caveat by saying, I think this is the right advice, but the first two are going to end up sounding pretty obvious. like nothing new. But as we're going to talk about, I think the reality is we've lost our way over some of the sort of fundamentals of marketing over the last 15 years. And so in some cases, what we need to do to fix our playbook is go back to the fundamentals. So number one thing to do, is recognize that, you've got to focus on the core of what marketing should be about, which is things like product market fit, positioning, and reputation, because those things are going to dominate over anything you might be doing in kind of in demand. And then
Can
the
we stop
second,
on, well, let's just stop on that one for a second, because there's so much there. And I want to think about, you're at Demandbase. How much after you sort of do the product market fit, positioning, and reputation, I mean, you do that in a concentrated period of time. Are you spending time on that after that? Is it like just sort of goes into hibernation?
happy to dive into it, although I think you're breaking your own rule about, starting with the brevity up top
All right,
by
fine.
diving deep.
Fine. Keep going with then. Fine. Thank you for keeping me on track. Okay. Number two.
So number two is also, again, seems obvious, but we've some lost our way, but it's like always do right by the customer. There's so many short-term pressures in marketing, whether it's MQL goals or pipeline or you name it. I think we often find ourselves doing things to make the number and not what's right for the customer. The third one is hopefully a little bit less obvious, but also, again, like should be duh once I say it, which is you got to be thinking much more deeply than you probably are about how AI is going to change your marketing. That is probably the biggest change that's going to happen to marketing in our lifetimes, and we need to be prepared.
Okay. Now I can go back to
Now you can
one at a
dive
time.
in.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for keeping us on track. So, all right. So the theory is we're not spending enough time aligning the big things, positioning, go-to-market fit, reputation, those things. And we just get on to execution and, so forth. I think that's the problem is that. So talk a little bit about that and how it manifests itself in terms of where CMOs are spending their time and how do we correct that?
Yeah, I see it all the time. Where business results aren't good for whatever reason, right? And then we all go through these, exercises of trying to figure out like, well, what's wrong, or even worse, like who are we going to blame? What are we going to blame? And the reality is, these are very complex dynamic systems. Like pipeline generation, revenue generation is a very complex dynamic system. If something's not working, it's rarely a simple narrative. It's rarely, oh, this one thing is broken, and if I just fix that, everything will be good. And I think there's this tendency that we try to treat the symptoms and not the root causes of what's going on. And so yeah, we missed pipeline. So then everybody gets dragged down in the tactics of marketing, right? And we start scrutinizing cost per lead, or squabbling over what's marketing versus sales source pipeline, or gosh, even worse, like start copy editing headlines and press releases. And that's treating the symptoms, not the problem, right? The problem usually, if you're not making your revenue numbers, your pipeline numbers, comes down to fundamentals of the business, like product market fit, like your core positioning and your core reputation. And, back to the question you asked me before, like, don't you just do that when you join and then you're done? And like, it doesn't work that way. Like it's like, first of all, there are a lot of businesses that, CMOs are joining that, may not have perfect product market fit. Even companies that do have product market fit, that's constantly changing. Just think of a company like Drift, right? That was like the hottest thing ever for a while, and then some things evolved and they fell out of product market fit. So you got to stay on top of that. Your competitors are constantly moving and changing, so your positioning, I don't think can always be the same. And then reputation, as we'll talk about, is I think just a better name for brand. And but again, what people think about you and how they feel about your company is something that is never a once and done exercise.
Right. In theory, you're constantly putting sort of deposits in the goodwill bank of your reputation, right?
Right.
But
if those things aren't right, if you don't have the right product market fit, if your positioning isn't in the right place, or your reputation is wrong, no marketing team, no matter how heroic you are going to deliver the results the business is looking for. And by the way, the flip is true. The flip side is true also. Like if you've got those things nailed, then even an average marketing team is going to look like heroes.
So it seems like we should spend a lot of time on product market fit and positioning and
reputation.
So are there, in thinking about the broken part is you're not spending enough time on it. You're not getting those things right. And you're not adjusting to changes in the marketplace quick enough. Right? Is that sort of the problem? So is it as simple as spending time on it, or is there something else involved here in your mind in terms of thinking about product market fit or thinking about positioning?
Well, we have to recognize that these are not things that are solely in the scope of a traditional CMO. Like the there's been a lot of talk out there about the CMO role needing to move away from being chief marketing officer to the chief market officer, because otherwise marketing is the only function, or the CMO is the only executive function that's named after a process, which as opposed to more of an outcome. So I think if you sort of, whether you change your title or not, thinking about that part of your job is influencing the rest of the leadership team around these more fundamental factors is, I think, a pretty important framing for CMOs. And we'll talk more about, like, it's not so easy, but
well, yeah, it's not easy. And that's the first thing I was thinking about is the numbers aren't, because we hear this in huddles all the time. We didn't hit our numbers. The CEO was in Salesforce and Marketo looking at the response rates to things, or the PE firm was in, looking at the Google AdWords to try to figure out what was wrong there. And I'm just, obviously the CMO wants to push them back out of the weeds and thinking about the bigger picture, but easier said than done.
I wish I had more advice besides, yeah, it's hard. I think, arguably the CMOs who were sort of the analytical ones who were really good at, measuring cost per MQL and optimizing business processes, arguably those are the CMOs that sort of nailed it over the last 15 years. And I would say the CMOs who are the most effective at collaborating with their peers and kind of helping to lead these dialogues around these sort of business fundamentals will be the ones that are most successful in the next 15 years.
Okay. So in your list of things that folks could do, it was sort of branded demand and in getting the being more customer centric, I think was sort of the
Well, what I
point.
said, do right by the customer.
Do right by the customer. Okay. And so is there anything more we should talk about there? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, so what I was thinking about trying to take everything I wanted to talk about and synthesizing it down. And like, I looked back at the post I wrote about my 2024 predictions about how marketing is going to change. And I wrote about things like the need for sort of better content and this more quality email, less quantity, and changes in how the SDR function, and what I realized is all that stuff, right, comes down to, like doing right by the customer, and remembering that, at the end of the day, we are trying to influence humans, actual people, not personas, not MQLs, not accounts, but actual people. And it's when we get it, Velocity Partners is an agency I work with. When they talk about when we get addicted to the sugar rush of MQLs is when we sort of go off track. And so, again, I think, focusing on doing what's right for the buyer, I really do believe, is easy to say, maybe not so easy to do, but is what's going to pay off in the long run.
So, and it's funny because doing right by the buyer immediately sends us one place. Doing right by the customer makes me think about CX and customer success and all of that. And you're
no. I'm not talking about the Ritz-Carlton or the,
right,
which like always give the customer what they want.
right.
I'm talking about, resist the temptation, have AI create a bunch of mediocre content, or to send, more emails because you're low on your MQL leads, or gating content that shouldn't be gated just because you're trying to, hit some metric, or asking people for demos when they're not even in the market. Right. Like those are all bad buyer experiences. And again, if you always think, is this a good buyer experience? That's probably going to pay off in the long run.
So simple litmus test, good buyer experience stays, bad buyer experience goes. Okay. And there are a lot of ways of thinking about that, because if you really do know the customer, I like to talk about this notion of speed to hero. If you know what will make them look good and what they need to sell internally and what they need to succeed, then, or as someone say, the job's to be done, you can make those and present those at the right time during their process, not necessarily day one. Hey, want a demo? Okay.
Yeah.
So the last one, which
AI.
could take up AI, which could take up the rest of the time, but let's go talk about why this is the biggest change in our lifetime.
Well, first off, one of my predictions I made for the year, which I still think is true, is that in general, we are overestimating and overhyping the impact AI is going to have in the short term, but then we're underestimating the long term.
Right.
So in the short term, it's all about Gen AI.
Right.
And we've all got excited about, creating, images and blog posts and all that kind of stuff. The advice I have on the short term is there's this thing called the jagged frontier, which you can research, which is basically saying that what the models are capable of is constantly moving. Even like with the release of GPT 4.0, like 2 weeks ago, like all of a sudden what they can do well and not do well has changed. And I think it's really important that every CMO is making sure their team is using these tools, not to necessarily generate content, but using them to help them, and learning where that jagged frontier is, and learning about modern prompting techniques like end shot prompts and chain of thought prompting, And if you don't know what those two terms mean, go Google them because they're really important in sort of the near term world of AI. But my main point here is that there's a much bigger change that's coming our way. And that's sort of what I call is as we transition from Gen AI to synth AI, right? Instead of generating, we're synthesizing. That we had a big splash of that. What was it? Just about a week ago or so, I guess, when Google sort of announced that they were releasing AI summaries for a bunch of web searches, and the logical implication of this is we're going to see dramatic. It's what they call zero-click search, right? Where people, we're going to see just dramatic drops in traffic to our websites from search because people are getting their summaries, their answers, on the site as opposed to clicking through. I think search is actually just the beginning, right? What happens when, we log into our email client and instead of seeing all of our emails, right? Instead, we're getting summaries of what we need to know about from our emails. And the AI is sort of just prompting us on the stuff that we need to know about, right? When that starts happening, drops in web traffic are going to look like a drop in the bucket compared to drops in emails, open rates, and click rates, and things like that. So we've got to be thinking about these things are coming. And what does it mean, right? So one of the things I think it means is pretty dramatic changes in how we think about content and marketing. So Chris Penn has, I think, a great line, which is, you need to focus on what machines can't summarize, which is experiences. Like the actual, and it gets into the feeling that people have, which ties back to the brand. Like you want to visit Disneyland, you don't want to read a summary about a trip to Disneyland. And then the content you create has to be so relevant that an AI summary can't ignore it. And that's going to get into some topics we'll talk about, like creating our own original research and data and building audiences and experiences and things like that. And last but not least, near and dear to my heart, is this is going to create a whole new set of platforms and technologies that we need to be thinking about also.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm starting at the end, but there's so many thoughts that I want to sort of put punctuation points on. One is more and more talk about it's the applications that sit on top of the LLMs that are going to be the big winners here. That's part one. I think I want to go back real quick to, yes, CMOs need to get their team to be using these tools. My problem is that the conversations that I keep having it feels like the imagination is limited by the understanding of what these things can do. And the reality is that the place to start is to ask the question, I'm thinking about doing this. How do I do it? And then, because what I see is way too much time on content, images and words, and not enough time on you talked about doing right by the buyer. There's a million things that these LLMs could do to build tools that you never could have afforded before that would enable the journey, because you could do all that analysis and say, what are the gaps? What don't they know? And then you could develop a tool for them to do it. That's not where the time is going to this, John, right now. It's going to content because that's the low-hanging fruit.
Fine. You got to use it and learn what it does well and what it doesn't learn well, and move beyond the sort of that basic use case. Absolutely.
Love the comment about experiences. Love that. It's very funny to me, and I'm just going to make a sort of, I write these Saturday posts. Several of them have gone viral. I do not let machines touch those posts.
Except the images.
Except for the images. Each of the images are created that. But by contrast too, well, it's also because I couldn't do penguins. But it's important to me that has flaws. It's important to me that people take challenges with the words, and so I think that there is a counter trend here that human made will matter and human experiences will matter. But no doubt all of this is going to change everything. All right. So we're moving on. One of the quotes that caught my eye: marketing is not a gumball machine. Can you talk about this issue and why demand creation as a mindset is so problematic?
Yeah. First off, I'll say every time I put that in a LinkedIn post, the post goes viral. There's something about that phrase in LinkedIn's algorithm. It just likes to show it. But the idea is, I mean, I think as marketers, and I'll take some blame for this, part of the old Marketo playbook. I think we sort of almost taught CFOs that marketing is a gumball machine. You give me this much budget, I will generate this many leads, and it will be this much pipeline. And the reality is marketing doesn't work that way. And maybe it worked that way a little bit 15 years ago, but it certainly doesn't today. It's again, back as I said earlier, it's a much more complex dynamic system. I think the biggest problem, and I know, we're gonna, we're gonna talk about brand some more, is that gumball machine mindset, I think, caused us to kind of over rotate into marketing that is highly measurable and focused on trying to kind of capture the existing demand, and underinvested in marketing that is about, building brand and awareness for future demand, if you will. And, as a result, for the last 15 years, our budgets have probably over indexed, on this, demand demand creation side. And that's back to one of my fundamentals of the business. When your reputation isn't where it needs to be, your demand isn't going to perform, right? So I want to just put like really hit that point home. Like when I'm talking about brand, I am not talking about your colors or your logo or your website design. And so many CMOs, right? They join a new company and the first thing to do is make a new website, right? But brand is, what do people think and feel about you when you're not in the room, right? And that is a much more subtle, nuanced thing that, frankly, I think if you spend your time and energy that and didn't touch the website, to the extent that, unless the website clearly is misaligned with the feeling, you might be in better shape, right? It's emotional. Then, like, because at the end of the day, you got to remember, we're talking about emotions, not logic. We're talking about the reptilian brain here. So, we could spend, again, a whole hour on this, but we're starting to see some themes that are connecting here, right? We need to do right by the buyer. We need to create experiences that can't be summarized, right? We need to also create things that sort of are so valuable that they're going to be sort of used kind of no matter what. This is about communities and audiences. It's about relationships, and there's all these things, like, so they sort of all connect together. But again, I think the highest point is it starts with marketing is not a gumball machine. We need to make these investments, and we need to do things that aren't going to directly tie into, look, I generated this many MQLs.
Okay. So 95-5 rule. Is it a myth?
Well, yeah, you'll notice I didn't say those words even as I was talking about marketing to people who are in market and not in market.
Yes.
So yeah, so first of all, I'm a big fan of what I'm going to call the 95-5 heuristic, right? Which is, we need to recognize that the reality is most of our target market is not in market looking to buy our stuff today. Let's just say it's 95%.
Okay. It could be right.
Then, if, most of your demand gen is everybody fighting over that same 5%, and the reality is we should be thinking a lot more about how are we creating emotional connections, to all those people who aren't in market. So, the 95-5 rule, I think is absolutely a true heuristic, i.e. most people aren't in market. The rule that it's always 95-5 is clearly wrong. And frankly, it's based upon not even like a study or research. It's based on literally just some basic math, that says if your market purchases once every 5 years, then in any then any year, only 20% are in market, which means in any quarter, only 5% are in market if you happen to have quarter-long sales cycles, right? So like the point, so like, let's embrace hey, most of these people aren't in market, and that means has profound implications for our marketing, and maybe just not worry so much about the fact that it's exactly 95 and 5.
Right. So we're not going to, yes, it's a notion, directionally accurate, but it could be 70-30. It could be 50-50. You don't know. It depends on your category, and you need to understand that. And then for those people that we don't.
By the way, it might be 99-1, which is probably way more likely than 50-50.
Interesting. 99-1 at any given time. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
How many people are in market right now today to replace their ERP system?
Wow. Less than 1%.
Exactly.
Right.
So
yes. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, you better have upsell opportunities for those folks, and have a strong brand that you can keep them. So there are some things in your notes and lists of like rethinking email and how we can personalize at scale.
Yeah.
And nurture via educational concept versus. So talk a little bit about that and what's going on in your mind.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, I think, marketing emails separate from sales emails, because I think they are kind of, distinct. And I guess the first thing I want to say is, I don't think email is going away. Even despite what I said earlier around, email AI summaries and all that kind of thing. I mean, the reality is, I think we've been using email as a marketing tool for over 40 years, and it feels like people have been predicting its death for like half the time. And yet email hasn't gone away. It's resilient, right? And it's resilient for a couple of reasons. Like, actually buyers say that they actually like receiving offers over email if the offers are relevant,
right,
and valuable. And then for marketers, email has quote unquote features that are actually important that aren't there in text messaging and Slack and other things, like clickable links, URLs that have UTM parameters, the ability to reply, the ability to have attachments, and so on. So, the ability to have a brand impression, are all, I think, parts of where email can be. But we've got to recognize, as a rule of thumb, marketers and salespeople will use any tactic so much to the point of abuse,
right,
and where it starts to become, less valuable. And email certainly suffered from that. I mean, buyers are certainly complaining that there's too many emails and too much junk, and the good stuff gets lost, and and so on and such forth. So ultimately, where this needs to go, especially in a world where the AI is going to be summarizing the emails, is how do we frankly create emails that aren't going to get summarized, that are more engaging. That's the more than the email itself. That's the underlying value of the content. But even in the email itself, I think there is value in personalization. What we have to recognize, though, is I don't think any marketers today are ready to trust the AI to go write 10,000 emails for 10,000 different customers without some level of review. And like, you can't review 10,000 emails.
No.
So there's some interesting, I just think, process and technical challenges on really scaling personalized email for marketing. But the other thing I think we're going to see for email, which starts to maybe get into, some of the other things that we can do, besides just the personalization at scale. One, I've always been a big fan of the human touch in email, where the emails actually come from real people, ideally people that they know, right? That's going to be more effective, less likely to get summarized. And then think about how your emails can become experiences, right? Telling stories, having a visual identity, having a creative value that sort of speaks to the reptilian brain, like all these things that, are good old fashioned Mad Men marketing, but are going to actually not get summarized, and make people sort of want and value the emails. So as I said, email's not going away, but it's definitely going to change.
Right. So I have one sort of pull quote for if it's relevant, it's not spam. And I think that in summarizing, as you were doing it, I'm thinking back the days when, talking about going back to original when I worked at J. Walter Thompson, It's like every great ad has surprise, emotion, and relevance. And if you have all three of those things, and you were talking about the surprises, the creative things, and the relevance, and some kind of interesting experience. So once again, our creativity is going to be tested as marketers. Wouldn't that be nice? So I hear from a lot of CMOs that in fact, a few in the Huddles community who've said, you know what, our SDRs weren't performing, I killed the program. So I'm curious if you think if automation and AI could be the solution here.
I mean, there's no doubt we're seeing declines in SDR productivity for all the reasons we expect, right? I mean, buyers don't want SDRs emailing them, especially when they're not in market, with like, hey, do you want to take a demo? So I think in the near term, it's just inevitable. We're going to see a lot more use of automation in the SDRs because it's exactly the symptom of what I just said. People are going to abuse any tactic, right? So if I have, declining response rates from my SDR emails, but I've noticed personalization can help, then sure, why wouldn't I, throw a robot at kind of scaling up, the research, the customization, the personalization. So we're going to absolutely see companies like a new role basically emerge. The example I always think about is when the spinning Jenny came out, and like we went from a world where we had humans that were just weaving cloth by hand, to where one human could manage 8 machines, right? That was a different skill set. It required 1/8 the number of workers. We're going to see that same thing happen in the world of SDRs, where like one human is, sending out the quantity of emails of 10 SDRs. And at the same time, I think another thing that we'll see, there's some fraction of SDR time that gets spent on marketing communications. Like if you're doing a dinner and you're trying to invite people to a dinner, like a lot of times marketers will have the SDRs do the invitations. That frankly AI can deliver that level of personalization, at scale. But as I said, I think this is all kind of near term, right? Just driving more content, more emails that aren't necessarily solving the fundamental problem. I think what's really going to happen goes back to what we've been talking about, right? If we can build our brand and our reputation, we can have ways for buyers to learn and educate themselves and then basically raise their hand when they are ready. Right? That's going to be the most effective. It's the best buyer experience. It's the most aligned to doing what's right for them. And in that world, SDRs, do more inbound. Again, we need fewer of them, but they're doing more inbound. They're doing some signal-based prospecting to just, reach out to those people right at that magic moment when they're ready to be the hand raiser. We'll probably see phone come back into more usage, as a way to have human connection. So like email, dramatic change coming.
So you've used the term emotional connection several times, and it's a thread because we want to have a better create a buyer experience, more connection to that buyer. But I don't hear in the C-suite, the CMO saying to the CEO and the CFO, well, we're doing a great job building an emotional connection with our buyer. In fact, it's hard for me to imagine that conversation, even though that's exactly what we're prescribing that they do.
Yeah.
What are the words that they could use? Because you get to this point where, what are you talking about emotional connection? And they're buying a piece of software to help their company grow their business from here to there. What's emotional about that?
Well, I mean, because we're selling to humans, and B2B decisions are complex by nature. And as humans, we use what are known as heuristics to simplify complex decision making. Right, we evolved this way, right? I mean, heuristic of see a lion and run. It's wired. Like using heuristics is wired into our DNA. There's a ton of research that has gone into the fact that basically emotions dominate heuristic development. Right, so all that's a bunch of fancy psycho speak to basically just explain that when we think we're doing a rational B2B purchasing decision, the reality is 9 times out of 10, we've probably emotionally already decided the answer. And much of the rational decision process, whether we are conscious of it or not, is back justifying that original emotional decision. And I bet everybody's listening like, well, I'm not that way, or my buyers don't act that way. And yet there's just a ton of neuropsychology research, that basically says this is actually happening. So, again, I really do believe this matters. And then as we sort of talked about, it's how well can you as a marketing executive kind of convince the CEO that this matters, right?
Yeah, and you probably have to help them, walk them through personal buying decisions, whether it was a car or whatever, some things so they can realize that, oh yeah, oh wait, I am subject, I am human, and I am emotionally driven on so many of the things that I buy, even big purchases.
I think that can help, and I think framing the discussion, can really help. Whether it's, as I said, like, don't talk about brand, right? Talk about reputation, or even better, in some cases, talk about competitive positioning, right? Your competitive positioning is, how do your buyers feel about you and how do they feel about the competition, right? That's a conversation the CEO probably wants to engage in, right? And that leads you into, these other discussions, around what is the emotional connection, and because you're using the word, how do they feel, not how do they think.
Well, and it's funny because it is a complex thing, because I do think that sometimes you need to put the rational vocabulary in there for, I'm thinking of a brand like Wasabi, where, their initial positioning was, 6 times faster and 80% cheaper than Amazon. Very good rational, but their name was Wasabi, and they promised this thing called hot cloud storage. So they had this sort of funky brand thing going on that surrounded this very rational thing, and they brought both. It feels like we don't live in a world where you can get away with simply, we know that just doing, Pepsi and Coke advertising would not get the job done. Or do we?
It's product market fit, it's positioning, and it's reputation, right? So, like, what I basically heard you say about Wasabi is they got the positioning right too. Right. And I think that really matters.
Okay. One of the things that we've talked a lot about in huddles over the time is that is product-led growth and the being able to create a self-service buying experience. And we know that that's hard for a lot of companies, particularly enterprises, long sales cycles and so forth, but it is on your playbook of a new way of approaching. So what are we talking about here in terms of creating a more self-service buying experience?
Yeah, I think the key to recognize is that, like, this is not just for product-led growth companies. This is the right buyer experience. Gartner reports 75% of B2B buyers want to be able to buy without interacting with a salesperson. And we're seeing more and more millennial and Gen Z buyers, so that means it's probably just accelerating. So, I think what you got to do is, like, how can you create the content and the tools that enable buyers to make informed decisions independently. And I think, 2 places where that tends to be the hardest is transparent pricing and personalized product experiences.
It's funny because you and I were talking about this 15 years ago when you were getting Marketo off the ground. It was the same thing.
Yeah, well, and it's hard because of all the reasons that the short-termism wins, right? I have MQL goals, I need to gate, my product demos, and so on and such forth. But I think if you think hard enough about it, you can find some answers. So as an example, when I was CMO at Demandbase, first of all, we invested in a lot of non-gated product tours because I think that was important. More interestingly, I really wanted to publish pricing, and we actually interviewed a bunch of our buyers. And what we learned was when they want pricing information, They don't want an exact quote. They want to know, what ballpark am I talking about here? Like, I'm putting together my budget for next year. How much do I need to put in the line item? Right. And they want those kinds of answers without talking to somebody. So what we did is we put together a pricing calculator, which is like a little wizard. It went through and asked them 6 or 7 questions around their needs and the requirements. And it basically said, based on what you're saying, it's probably in this ballpark. You know, and 9 times out of 10, that's what they needed. So the point is, I think you can figure out ways to enable buyers with the information you want, you know, and give them the right buying experience without kind of necessarily, quote unquote, you know, screwing everything up.
And just to circle back to something we were talking about earlier, today, if you needed to create a wizard, you would go on to ChatGPT and say, I want to create a pricing wizard along this kind of line. Tell me what the steps are to do it. Then you could probably get it to program it and do it, and it'd take you about 1/10 of the time. And right. I mean, it's just, those are things that you couldn't have done before, right? Before you'd have to hire a programmer, you'd have to set up the database, all those things. That's a big change that we're looking at. Okay. Time for the hardest part, I think, in all of this about metrics. And you banish MQLs in favor of brand engagement, retention, expansion, and what you call team-based pipeline. We've got PE and VC operators here with us right now. Sell them on this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of some of the things that we have talked about in terms of positioning things appropriately. So let me try to be a little bit more concrete. So first off, wherever possible, if you can actually take some of these quote unquote softer metrics like engagement and show actual lift, that makes it a lot more quantitative. So, you know, like there's some research that show that people are 40% more likely to visit a website if they've seen display ads from that advertiser. Right. So if you can do test and control, for example, you know, and, you know, show some people see certain brand impressions or certain things, other ones don't, and then show relative changes in pipeline or in engagement or even pipeline, that tends to be pretty rigorous. So I want to talk about the team-based pipeline concept.
Please.
I think way too much time and energy gets spent on trying to attribute this is a marketing sourced or this is a sales sourced deal. And the reality is that's almost always, I think, a false narrative. You know, like every marketer I know has taken some deal that sales said this is sales sourced and gone and like said, well, look at all the marketing touches that kind of happened along the way. You know, and the flip side is true also. Like marketing claims credit for some opportunity sourced from a trade show, but it was a salesperson who was actually speaking to that person, you know, at the event, perhaps not even in the booth. You know, and even then, that's the stuff that we can track. What about all the dark touches, like word of mouth, you know, that we can't track, or the influence of our analyst and, you know, AR investments, or God forbid, everything we talked about brand and reputation. You know, word of mouth. Like the reality is the reason a deal is very complicated, and trying to attribute it down to, well, it was this sales touch or it was this marketing touch is never going to give you correct answers. So if you can accept that it's never right, then you can also then accept the fact that if you try to assign credit, you're actually hurting the collaboration that you want between sales and marketing. And you're encouraging finger pointing. So that's why I think the right answer is to, you know, have everybody focus on the shared metrics, which is usually the total pipeline that is created. You know, was enough pipeline created to meet our collective goals? And secondarily, then revenue. You know, did we create enough revenue? Now, this is not to say you don't measure individual performance. Like, let's use a sports analogy, right? What we care about is, did the team score enough points to win? There's one scoreboard, not 2 scoreboards. That doesn't mean the coach isn't filming the players and running game tape and doing individual coaching to improve individual performance, right? It doesn't mean that there's not, you know, go to football, an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator who's individually trying to optimize the performance of these individual teams. But it does mean there's still one shared metric and goal, and people get paid or not paid on the shared team performance. So yeah, now how do you convince a PE firm to kind of, embrace this stuff? Right. I mean, these are real issues. I mean, part of the reason I spend as much time talking about this stuff as I do, because I'm trying to help communicate a change and a new movement to give air cover to other CMOs who are talking about it. But it's not going to be just me. It's going to be all of us as CMOs, repeating this drum over and over, until, effectively kind of we get heard, and that's going to require, as I said earlier, CMOs spending more time building relationships with their peers and their boards, and frankly, marketing their marketing. Helping these other executives understand the new buying dynamics, and then maybe engaging them in a constructive conversation, saying, okay, if we can all agree this is the way buyers buy, and we know it's complex and we know all these things factors, what metrics should we be tracking, right? And bring them into the conversation, and you'll probably end up in a better place.
Okay. I wonder how many folks that are listening right now are ready to banish MQLs and banish marketing sourced opportunities. And I do think that it is problematic. I've written about it. I write about it. I'm with you. I'm on this because it's not a winning formula to focus on sourcing and so forth. That the key to in my mind on this one is that you've got to have short-term and long-term metrics, and pipeline and revenue are lagging metrics. That's the problem, right? So as you described, it is the scoreboard at the end of the game. Yeah. But it is not how you got there, and it is not predictive of the next one. So it is a problem, and why you need all these other things of brand or reputation, engagement, retention, expansion, all those other things. Okay, you talk about a new playbook with new tools. What do you have in mind?
Yeah, well, certainly something I've been thinking about for a while now. I mean, what I know is the traditional marketing automation platforms were built for the old playbook, right? I mean, Marketo was built to generate MQLs for net new business pipeline, single touch attribution. I mean, everything that we sort of said is sort of old, right? I think we're going to need a new generation of AI powered B2B marketing platforms. And these are going to be different, right? I mean, yep. Think about, like, if you're trying to do a dinner, as a marketer, right? In the current tools, what do? You go in and you start dragging filter, or your MOPS person starts dragging filters. Like, I need people whose title contains this and who live in one of these 6 different places and have not been emailed this number of times, blah, blah, blah. Right. But why can't AI do that? Right. If AI can generate, content, it can also generate lists for our programs. You think about traditional marketing automation, it's very static. It's like a nurture is send email 1, wait a week, send email 2, wait a week, send email 3. And yet, but that's not how buyers buy. Right. Buyers are moving in and out of different stages of their journey and engaging different content and looking at different things. And it's not just that person, it's people from their company and their buying group, different things. Right. Instead, we should move to a model where, oh, hey, I've got Drew. Right. How often should I speak to Drew and what should I say? Right. That's a much smarter, more dynamic journey than the static flows of the existing platforms today. So, so this is stuff I'm excited about, kind of like how marketing tech is going to evolve, not just for, using AI, but really AI to embrace sort of the new buyer journey and that kind of thing.
And ultimately will help the buyer because they'll have a better experience. They'll be able to get to it. It's so funny. So much of the research that I remember Brent Adams had talked about is the buying experience is so painful by the end of it, they hate you, even though they bought you. And so you really, it's just this, if it's a better buying experience, in theory, they, because it was dynamic, not static, in theory, they'll start strong too. Okay, let's wrap up. please provide 2 do's and 1 don't when it comes to rethinking your marketing playbook in 2024 and 25.
Yeah, I think just summarizing the themes we talked about, don't let short-termism win. Do, as we talked about, focus on the fundamentals like product market fit, positioning, reputation, doing right by the customer. And then do spend time and energy as a CMO to be building credibility and relationships with your peers and boards so that they understand the new marketing and how the metrics are going to be different.
Awesome. Well, Jon Miller, thank you very much. How can listeners keep up with you and the progress on the new company?
Yeah, well, as I said, we're still stealth, so you're going to have to kind of stay tuned for about probably another year or so on the new company. But follow me on LinkedIn. I'm definitely talking about all this kind of stuff and dropping clues about what I'm up to along the way. So
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for staying with us.